Morning.
Oh, oh,
Hey, Mr. John, you hear me?
I hear you well. Marcus, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Very nice to meet you here. We had a very brief meeting with Leonardo a few years ago when we came through Toronto,
No,
right?
it's Ottawa. Ottawa.
It was Ottawa, exactly.
It's okay.
Sorry, it was
Everybody.
Ottawa. Because that was a strange gig. It was sort of like if I can't remember what was the venue. Do you remember the
I,
name
I
of the
remember.
venue?
I can't remember the name, but it was down on. It's not far from where I live, but it
Yeah,
was. I think you had to go up a flight of stairs to get to it, if
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
mistaken. Which would have meant like lugging all your gear up there, which is no fun. I used to play in that room when it was a different venue, like a different owner. I played in that room before. It's kind of weird, yeah. But
John, which instrument do you play?
I'm a guitar player.
There you
No,
go. I had no idea.
I was actually a professional player. I mean, I spent 10 years as a house guitar player in a local studio,
Mhm.
just, gun for hire. And I was kind of gun for hire as well. And I mean, I'm not a writer. So, there was myself and this drummer and a bass player who owned the studio. And we were like a rhythm section for hire because people could hire us and we'd like learn a repertoire in like one rehearsal and then go and play. And I did that. And then I played until 2003. I had a really bad experience that's just not worth going into, but it was bad experience with a particular band. And things were changing here, pay to play, all the stuff, all too well about. And I just decided I had enough. And I was starting to get into the writing. And the writing kind of ultimately supplanted my playing. And I stopped playing until very recently when I decided I really wanted to start playing again, but not necessarily professionally, but just at home. And my wife, for my 65th birthday, brought me this very, very cool guitar. It's from a company in the States called Electrophonic Innovations. And I wish I could show you it, except that it's off for repair right now. Long story. And it's got two speakers, stereo speakers built into the body, an 18-watt amp, analog effects, and a variety of different emulations, all built into the body.
Mhm.
And so, on 4 rechargeable batteries, it lasts about 8 hours. You just pick it up, turn the power button on. I mean, you can Bluetooth it or plug it into an amp too, but I wanted something that, because I'm in a 2-bedroom condo, I didn't want something where I needed to get an amp and, effects and all that stuff. I'm not as deep into the whole outboard gear thing as you are. I was, but not as much as you. Anyway, so it's great guitar, and I'm getting back at it. And it's funny thing, muscle memory, I can't, I mean, my hands are older. I got some arthritis. I can't necessarily be as dexterous as I used to be, but I was amazed when I first picked it up at how much my hands remembered where to go. Isn't that an amazing thing?
It is amazing. I mean, I started playing the fifth tuning when I was 18, right? And I had only played the fourth tuning for 3 years prior to that.
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah.
But you can give me an instrument tuning in fourth any day and I can play it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It is.
It's
I
kind
mean,
of
it really is.
it really speaks for the fourth tuning, dude.
Well, I mean, there was a time when I considered trying, Robert's new standard tuning, but it just looked a bit too frightening for me. I'm now in the midst of reading Anthony Garone's Failure to Fracture.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did try. I mean, I was in a band in the 70s. We were on the road for a few years and we played largely progressive rock stuff and we did some Crimson stuff. And I must say, I did give Fracture like an attempt, but I never came even anywhere near being able to do it. And I am in, like total awe of Anthony for having done it and for documenting the story. Have you seen the book?
Yeah, I have a copy. Yeah.
I figured you would. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to review it for the for All About Jazz, and I'll include it in my Crimson book when that comes out. So
Nice, nice. Yeah. Yeah, you see the being a musician, or well, like I don't think you can ever stop being a musician, even if you only listen or only write or whatever, you know, like I think it is a completely different perspective if you actually know some of the background of what you're writing about, right?
I agree. I mean, one of the things that when I was managing editor for All About Jazz and, you know, editing a pile of stuff and managing other editors, one of the things that I noticed was, you know, like you can tell the writers who have even like, you don't have to be professional. I mean, you just have to have some conversational engagement with for playing music in some way to have certain understandings. And you can always tell the guys who didn't, you know, and it doesn't mean that you can't write if you're not a musician, but it is a different thing. I mean, you know, I spent a lot of time in the studio, so even though it's been quite some time, I understand a lot of the basics about what happens when you're in a studio and how you make a record. So, you know, I think it certainly helps. You know, for me anyway, it's certainly been very helpful to understand the process of making music when I'm trying to write and tell people what this music is in words, which is always a hard thing to do anyway.
Yeah, I think that it is quite easy to be blinded by the fascination with the subject sometimes, right? And I find that happens occasionally in the sciences, like where there's research where you can tell that the people are researching something that they have no idea about, and that's kind of the motivation, and that's a good thing, you know, it's a good thing in a way. But then for some things you would only have to ask an expert and you would get an answer, you know, and you wouldn't really have to do the, the research. You know, I've come across some studies like that and some books like that where I really had to put them aside, you know, and one of them is actually a pretty famous book that I just couldn't read because like the tone, to me it was very clear that the writer had no idea what he was writing about. Like it was music, it was like a psychological side of music.
Oh, okay.
But
I think I can guess who it might be, but anyway.
Yes, yeah, you know exactly who it is. And I was, you know, I just couldn't read it, you know, it was just difficult for me.
Well, you know, because you know, I mean, you know, the thing is, you know, and so, you know, you can tell, you know, for me, before I was writing, you know, I mean, when I looked at people who wrote about music, you know, I mean, what I was looking for was honesty and understanding of what was going on, so that they could articulate to me as best as possible what it was, and then I could decide whether I was interested or not. And if they can't do that, I don't know if they really have any business writing about it. You know, I mean, you have to have some understanding of what this stuff is. And, you know, when we did the thing with Leonardo a few weeks ago, one of the great points you made, you know, is Leonardo says, you know, I'm not a musician, but if you look at his life, you know, and what he does, he is. Yeah. You know, he just doesn't have his hands on an instrument, you know. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that's really how I see everybody who's sort of involved in the birthing of music, right? And with birthing of music, I don't even mean the production process. I mean everything that comes after that. The people who help promote it, the people who have a voice, right? Like who kind of like build opinions and stuff. And I think it's those people are also ideally, let's say, musicians, right? Yeah. And hey, so when you stop playing the instrument or stop playing more or less in professional context, did the writing only start then, or the writing must have been with you for longer than that, right?
Not much. It started. I started writing. This is good. This is a good story. I started writing around 2000 or so. I had been working, I was basically a high-tech geek by day and a musician by night. I mean, I was literally, you know, I mean, this was back in the days when you could get 6-night-a-week club gigs. So, you know, I'd work 12 hours at wherever I was working in the day doing high-tech stuff. And at night I'd go play sometimes 2 or 3 weeks in a month for 6 nights, which I was younger and could do it. But anyway, I got out of high-tech because I really had enough. I just couldn't take, it was too high pressure and too minimal reward, not financially, but, you know, emotionally and intellectually, it just stopped being rewarding. So I didn't know what the heck to do. And I have this drummer friend of mine who also writes. His name is Bruce Whitted. He's a great drummer. And he said, you know, you have a mind like a steel trap with music. You remember everything. And you said you should write about it. So I thought, okay, great. I'm going to write a book about ECM records, which I was a big fan of. So, you know, I knew about networking. So I started reaching out to musicians and doing interviews. And I actually ended up doing about 15 or 16 interviews. And, you know, I talked to Bill Frisell and I'd ask Bill, you know, can you put me in touch with Paul Motion, you know? So it would work like that. But that was where it stopped because I called Paul Motion's number. This would be around 2001, I think. And I left a message saying, you know, I'm so-and-so, I'm looking to write a book on ECM. I'd love to do an interview. Can we talk? And about a day later, I get a phone call and it's this woman who says, hi there, my name is Tina Pelican and I'm a publicist for ECM in New York. And I'm just wondering, what are you doing calling my musicians? So we became very good friends, but she was, you know, a little crusty. And I said, well, I'm writing a book on ECM. And she said, oh, that's great. She said, who's the publisher? And I said, well, I don't have one. And then she started asking me a series of other questions, which pretty much nailed the fact that I had no idea what I was doing, other than maybe I was doing good interviews. But, you know, so she said, you know, really what you should do is you should, you know, do some writing and get some cred before you start focusing on something as big as a book. And so, you know, we became good. I mean, she was great. She started sending me all these ECM releases and I was reviewing them for a bunch of smaller sites until one day All About Jazz found me. And I got an email saying, you know, we see you writing for this site, and that site. Why aren't you writing for us? And I looked at the site. And I just immediately, because I was a high-tech guy, I just said, that's a really good question. And because like no website for jazz, at least at the time, and I would hazard a guess to say almost for music in general now, is as exceptional as a piece of high-tech architecture than as All About Jazz. I mean, Michael Ritchie, the founder and publisher, is to me a hidden visionary in terms of helping musicians, getting the word out about music, you know, all this stuff. And he's a triple threat. I mean, he plays trumpet, so I mean, he's not a pro, but he plays an instrument, so he understands the process. But he's a total jazz lover, other stuff too, and he's a high-tech total guru when it comes to that stuff. And so that was the beginning. I mean, I started writing for them, and within 3 months, I was exclusively writing for them. Within 6 months, I wanted to work in the back end, and, you know, it just sort of went from there. And that was in 2004. But, you know, it started around 2000, 2001. I started writing about stuff. And I got good feedback, but I never anticipated, you know, like that it would sort of lead to what it has led to now, you know, that somebody like you would want to actually talk to me about it. I just figured it was like, I'm just doing it. But what I will say, as for those out there who might be thinking about writing about music, you can say what you want about Stephen King, but he had something of that I took to heart as an approach to learning how to write, and that was write 8 hours a day, every day. And that's what I did. So when I first started writing for All About Jazz, I mean, I was a writing machine. And I mean, you know, it didn't in any way compromise what I was doing. I had this routine of cycling music in and out of my consciousness as I was going through stuff, so that by the time I came to write about it, I knew it well. I'm not a believer in like listening to an album once and then writing a review. I think that's some people think that's great first impressions and everything, but I think that you miss stuff and you don't get deep into it on the first listen. Anyway, so so Stephen King was my mentor when it came to the craft of writing. And by the time I got to All About Jazz, I was already writing reasonably well, although when I look back now, I kind of cringe, as I have been with this Crimson book I'm doing. And but All About Jazz, because it's got such a huge readership. I mean, when I joined, it was getting about 350,000 unique visitors a month, And I remember being at the Montreal Jazz Festival in 2009 with Michael, and we were meeting with the high-tech guy from Montreal Jazz Festival, and we were at lunch, and the guy was asking, like, what's traffic like right now? And Michael went and looked, and it just so happened on that one day, and it's been the only day, we had 1 million unique visitors in one day.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing. So All About Jazz has proven to be a great vehicle for me to get my name out there. And because I was writing so much, in a very short period of time, people were going, who's John Kelman and where the hell does he come from? And all this stuff, and writers in Ottawa who write for Downbeat, they called me up and going, who the hell are you? And these were guys who, were way better writers than I was, and am still probably, I'd say. But, it gave me a place to really hone my chops and get exposed to way more music than I'd ever thought possible. So it worked out well. And so, by the time I joined All About Jazz, I was just writing so much. I was still playing until 2003, but it just, it started to become a challenge to balance the two, and do it well. Yourself. If you're going to play, you want to do it. You want to do it well, and if you're competing many hours of your day with other things, sometimes that can be a challenge. So I think it was a mistake for me to put guitar down completely, in retrospect. But I'm glad to have picked it up again now because I'm really having fun. So,
Yeah, man, that's I find that interesting because that's sort of like almost like a second career, and you said that was like about 20 years ago, right? So you had already had a long life before that, where you were able to accomplish things, right? And
they all contributed to this. I sometimes wish that I'd been writing longer because I have friends who are lifers. A friend of mine in Cleveland, Carlo Wolf, great writer, and he's been doing this his whole life. And I sometimes wish I had that, but on the other hand, I feel like everything I did before, it kind of led to this. And here it is, for whatever it is,
Exactly. For me, it was like when I was 42, it felt like a completely new era is going to start, and it was true. It was true somehow. Yeah. And So, John, tell us a little bit about like your initial, if you feel like it, if it's okay, tell us a little bit about your childhood and your teens, let's say, and how you got to love music and like first experience playing a musical instrument and blah blah blah.
Okay. Well, I was always a fan of music when I was a kid. My parents, my dad was a jazz fan. My mother was a Broadway musical fan. I'm not a big fan of Broadway musicals, to be honest, but I did get to know, a lot of songs that were in the Great American Songbook through that. And then through my dad, we'd go to see shows. But what happened was when I was about 10 years old, and I'm going to say this with, a certain amount of embarrassment, but my favorite band when I was 10 was a band called the New Christie Minstrels. They were really they were like a, it's hard to describe, but let's say one of the guys in the band was a guy in the group was a guy named Barry McGuire, got a huge hit in the 60s called Eve of Destruction. But anyway, I was a big fan of those guys, and they had this Hawaiian guy who played banjo, and I loved the banjo, and I really wanted to play the banjo. So my grandfather, on my 10th birthday, said, we'll go and we'll buy you a banjo. And he took me to this store named Metro Music in Ottawa, which is still there. And the banjos were $95 and guitars were $15. So I got a guitar. And, but the great thing is the guy who runs the place, or ran the place, now it's his daughter, because he passed away sadly about, must be 20 years now, a guy named Bob Sabarat, a guy who should have been a well-known guitar player. I mean, he was a monster. I mean, especially in the jazz world. We ended up playing together in wedding bands later, but you know, he was an amazing teacher. Total no bullshit. If you didn't do your homework, you entered the room in fear because he was not going to tolerate it. But he was a tremendous teacher, and his teaching was based on three things. One of them was Berklee Modern Method for guitar. Okay, so that was the thing we were doing. Before that, Mel Bay. And then the second thing was to check out an album, and it was not necessarily jazz, although it could be, you know. I mean, he introduced me to Miles Davis and Wes Montgomery, but he also introduced me to Johnny Winter. He sold some albums in his store, not a big section, but he had some records there. And so he was a great teacher. And and the third thing was, at this time, so like, I mean, we're talking 1966 was when I was 10, back in the Stone Age. And there was a club here called Lippy Boo, the Owl. And it was an unlicensed coffee house back in those days. Coffee houses were a big thing. And they had, like, they booked acts like from everybody who was on the road. I mean, like, I'm talking about anything from like Lenny Breau, the great Canadian expat jazz guitar player. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He died youngish, and he never got to be as big as he should have been, but you should check him out. Live at Bourbon Street with Dave Young, this double bassist. He did things with harmonics. He played a 7-string guitar, finger style. And I mean, he was as familiar with like flamenco playing as he was with, like, you know, linear jazz line playing and stuff like that. He was tremendous. Anyway, and he did this incredible thing with harmonics that many guitar players have since copied. They don't always know it came from him, but anyway. So guys like Lenny Breau played there, but also, like, you know, in the blues, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee played there. I saw Weatherford played there in 1972, 75-seat coffee house, you know. Dreams, the band that originally had the Brecker Brothers. It was after Cobham and John Abercrombie had left, but, you know, still an amazing band. Will Lee was on bass. I mean, you know, it was a great band. And I saw Miroslav Vitus with Larry Coryell and a drummer who's since gone by the wayside in my brain. And, you know, so I was constantly being exposed to stuff. And at the beginning, you know, my dad had to take me to shows. But by the time I was about 13, I could just go myself. And so all the way from 10 through 16, I was doing these three things. They're all part of my education. And I really credit Bob for having given me the gift of like big ears and not being biased against, you know, against music, you know, being open. He was really instrumental in that. And I took lessons from him until I was 16. And by that time I'd started playing in bands. And the first band I was in, we didn't have a singer, but we had a piano player who played Rhodes. We had a bass player, my friend, the drummer, Bruce, and we had a guitar player who also played violin. So, hey, Mahavishnu Orchestra, you know. 15-year-olds doing Meeting of the Spirits. It was, I mean, I have no recordings of it, and probably that's just as well, but it was ambitious stuff for that age. And also, we were playing Allman Brothers, like instrumental stuff. And anyway, stuff like that. And that was the beginning of my really getting interested in like, playing in bands. I discovered two things. One, that it was much more fun playing with other people. And two, it was much more fun playing with other people in front of other people. The value of an audience.
Did you have a guitar lessons?
Yeah, with Bob. Yeah, all that time.
Yeah, and all that time. Okay.
Yeah, from 10 through 16, I ultimately did the Berklee Modern Method for guitar.
Oh, amazing, really. That's
so yeah. And he was, but it was all him. He was great. I mean, he was.
Yeah, wow.
He was so encouraging, And when I started playing in bands, he'd come out and see me, and he would like, he was great. And I cannot overstate how important he was in my life. So I started playing in bands, and one sort of thing led to another. I ended up in a band called Glass that was largely progressive. We were doing Gentle Giant. We had two female singers, a guy who played trumpet, a keyboard player, a bass player, myself, and a drummer. And we did all kinds of weird stuff. We did some Zappa. We used to do Peaches on Regalia, things like that. And that led to my being asked to join a band called Larkspur, which was a pretty big band in the city at the time. And in fact, the guitar player in that band was the guy who I played with, who played violin just a few years prior, Ed Stevens. And he was getting tired of playing with them. So basically, we swapped places. He joined Glass and I joined Larkspur. And Larkspur, I played on the road for 2 years, probably 40 to 45 weeks a year we were on the road. And, it was really like at the bottom of the rung. We were playing good clubs, but, staying in very, very suspect accommodations. And, the travel was grueling. We didn't even travel in a van. We traveled in a car. But we did, it is a long story, but it was a good band to play in. The musicianship was high, but the personalities were difficult in some cases. But it was fun, and it was good while it lasted. And then I left. And at that point, I was pretty seasoned. In terms of, gigging, but I had very little experience in the studio. We had one day in the studio at Thunder Sound in Toronto with Terry Brown, the guy who produces Rush. And it was like a scene out of Spinal Tap. Like everybody, arguments, just abounding. And I was just amazed that Terry Brown could maintain his cool through the whole thing. I mean, we walked away with nothing. After that day, we had nothing to show for it other than, a bill. But it was still, my one experience, and then I did, so that was sort of what led me up to my early 20s. At which point, after Larkspur, I said, there's no way in hell I'm going to go back on the road. I didn't realize you could maybe do it differently. And, so I worked in a record store, went back to school, got into high tech. And after a couple of years of not playing because I'd been fed up with the whole scene, I started getting into playing again. And initially through wedding bands, oddly enough, but with people who are really good players. And so, like the leaders of the bands were usually not great players or great anything, but they knew enough to hire good people to play for them. And so we had a lot of fun. I mean, it was, doing stuff I'd rather not play, but it was fun. We did some fun. It was fun anyway. And, most of the time there was occasionally an electric piano, but usually it was just me. So I was responsible for carrying a lot of load, because I had to carry, chordal stuff and solo and sometimes both at the same time, and you know what I mean. You know exactly what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
So so it was a good experience to do it, and that led to my playing with a local singer-songwriter who's actually better known everywhere in Canada except here. Well, it's not totally true. But anyway, name's Ian Tamlin. He is a tremendous and quintessentially Canadian singer-songwriter who also happened to do a couple of instrumental albums, one funded by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC. And all this stuff was what led to my ending up starting to do studio work. I recorded my first album with Ian called Dance Me Outside, which was his Bob Dylan at Newport. He was an acoustic guitar player, and this was like a way out electric band. And his fan base absolutely hated it. So I think he still has probably like 2/3 of the copies of vinyl that he pressed at the time in his basement. But you know what? It wasn't a bad record. In retrospect, going back, you know, there were some things that make me cringe, but there were some okay things on it that made me go, you know what? That was all right. And I learned a lot about getting a sound in the studio through that album, you know. And that was the big thing. I mean, I suspect that getting a sound in the studio is not really a deal for you because, you know, you're running, it's more your instrument and your outboard gear that creates your sound, not an amplifier. Is that correct to say?
Well, you know, when I'm in a studio, then I actually do want to use the studio as a tool, and I will want to find a sound in the studio. So it's like the gear that I'm taking on stage is sort of just the attempt to take some part of the studio on stage. Okay. That's how I see it. So you know, when I'm at home, I hardly ever use like the full pedal board. I use individual pedals, and so. Yeah.
Okay. No, for me it was like yes, that's the thing. So like learning how to, you know, because and the other thing I learned is that through an album I did with Ian Tamlin, interesting, this is a good story. We did an album called Over My Head, which was an album that blended instrumental music with indigenous birds from this area that he had to record. And it was commissioned by CBC, and it was originally a performance thing. We went to a museum of natural history and we did 2 nights there. And it was kind of cool because what we did was we played in the center of the room. It was a circular room, played in the center of the room, and we had the speakers all facing out at people. So it was a surround sound experience. And this was like 1986. So anyway, we decided to go in the studio and because it was successful enough to think we could maybe make a record and sell some. And we went in and we thought we'll put it down in a day. And we went in and recorded it, and it just sucked. It was terrible. And we realized that, you know, it doesn't always translate. You can, but what's live sometimes doesn't work when you start doing it in a studio. Yeah. So we had to kind of reconstruct it, and we ended up with an album that was, you know, it's still pretty good. But the thing that's funny is it ended up getting picked up by Sony in Canada. And I mean, at the time, we got 2 things. One this is about Ian. We didn't get paid. We all agreed that we wouldn't get paid because there was no money. So we did the album for free. And then one day, literally about 10 years later, I'm living downtown in another place, and he knock on my door, and it's Ian. He said, "We've broken even," and he handed me a check and he paid me. I don't know many guys who do that, you know, that long later. But the other thing is the album has sold over 100,000 copies, but nobody knows because when Sony took it, they wanted the cover and the CD booklet redone. And they list all the birds, but they don't list any of the musicians. So I'm on a record that's, I guess, a gold record here, and nobody knows, but that's okay. And then I did another with him called Magnetic North that sold about, I don't know, at this point, I think around 45,000. And it was in many ways, in some ways it was better. In other ways, it was an evolution from the first one. But this time he had been up to the Arctic and recorded things like glaciers breaking and, you know, whales and all kinds of things like this. And there were some magical moments, like when we did the title track, where we're playing along with like this loop of a log drum. And all this, and we're supposed to be transposing into this second section that modulates, and the whale sound comes in, and we're playing, and we got this stuff pounding behind us. And right when we modulate, the whale modulated exactly the same way. So there were magic moments. Anyway, those were some fun things. And actually, Magnetic North was recently released on vinyl. So, you know, but anyway, so, you know, I'm babbling on, but, you know, the bottom line is I got, you know, and as a result of all that stuff with Ian, you know, I got to know this guy named Phil Bova, who had this local studio, and he started hiring me for doing everything from, you know, gun for hire for a singer-songwriter to, you know, you're in a grocery store and there's a little TV that shows you how to peel peaches, and there's this little acoustic guitar behind it, you know. So
this was when you were like your early 30s or something, probably. Then,
yeah,
right?
that would be definitely, that would be sort of 30 to 40 roughly. I mean, and I was playing a lot, because not only was I still playing with Ian, but I started playing with other people. And then this all kind of led to, I played with, you know, some other singer-songwriters who become known, a woman named Lynn Miles, who records for Rounder. I was on her first album, Chalk This One Up to the Moon. Then in the mid-90s, there was this local guy named Jerry Griffin, who had an interesting story that he had landed himself in prison in Spanish Morocco. He claims to this day that it was the other guy's stuff, but, you know, he got caught in a van filled with some hashish, and he got put in prison. And, you know, people who write songs, you know, they have to have something to write about. And, you know, spending about a year in Spanish Morocco prisons before Amnesty International got him out, gave him a lot to work with. And he had this one great album in him. And he put together this band, which was myself, my friend Bruce again on drums, a local bass player who also played stick named Tom McMahon, really good player, a blind female accordionist who had great ideas, but not great time, but we worked with it. And then there was Jerry, who was like an acoustic guitar player, tremendous harmonica player. And it was kind of roots, American roots music. I mean, his voice is sort of gravelly like John Hyatt. And when it came to doing an album, we were playing his music and developing it for a good year until he decided he wanted to record it. And he managed to get the money together to bring up a guy named Jeffrey Lesser from New York. He was, I guess you'd call him an A-list engineer and B-list producer, although in the 60s, he produced the Barbra Streisand album, but in the 70s, like, he engineered guys like Lou Reed. You know, he was in the scene. And the 1 week we spent recording that album, which was largely done live off the floor, except for our accordionist, who had to spend about 3 days trying to overdub because just her time was not great. But the rest of it was recorded largely live off the floor. And he taught me the secret of getting a great sound out of my amp, which had to do with 2 mics, putting them properly in phase with each other, and how to do that. So from that point on, like, I was militant about any time I was being recorded that it was being done that way. Because I mean, my sound went from being like this, you know, from being small to suddenly being huge. I'm just playing a lot of slide with a lot of distortion. So it was really kind of low end, big sound, right cooter kind of thing. And it was great, because suddenly it was like, wow, this actually sounds as good as my head hears it. And unfortunately, I mean, the album generated some interest from record labels in Canada until they saw Jerry, who, you know, is about 10 years older than me. So, you know, this was 95. So, okay, it was 25 years ago. He looked like an old dude. And this was in the height of the video boom, you know, with MTV and Up Canada Much Music. And they just said, you know, we love the music, but we can't do anything with you.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, the album did not do what it might have. I mean, it was a good record. When I listen back to all the stuff I did, as far as consistently being good and never make me want to puke, it's a good record. So, you know, that was our big line in the studio. It didn't make me want to puke. And, you know, if I could listen to it, that's good.
And so, John, like these band and album projects, you were mostly playing electric guitar. That's what it sounded like to me, right?
Acoustic. No, I also played acoustic. For a long time, I had like just a regular acoustic that I amplified. I put a pickup in it and stuff. But then because I was playing a lot of stuff live with acoustic, at one point, actually, I was playing acoustic guitar, electric guitar. I was using rolling guitar synths. So I was, you know, sending it out to create other sounds. Like with Lynn, I used, you know, top 4 strings sound like a guitar, bottom 4 strings sound like a cello. So, you know, I was doing that kind of stuff. But acoustic guitar, I ended up buying like a Guild Songbird, which was like a thin line acoustic guitar that was easily electrified and didn't feed back all over the place. So yeah, I actually played quite a bit. And when I played with Ian, I used to actually do like a little couple of solo segments where I played. I'm big into traditional British stuff like Richard Thompson does. And I used to do a couple of the solo pieces he did, Banished Misfortune from Strict Tempo and Dargai from Pour Down Like Silver. So no, in fact, on the 2 albums I did with Ian, I probably played about 60% electric and 40% acoustic. So you know, and I also played a bit of mandolin. So I just
mandolin is the first stringed instrument I learned.
No kidding. Yep. Wow.
Yeah.
My big problem was, sorry, go ahead.
No, as an 8-year-old, it really was like the first, you know, stringed instrument I learned. And it's funny because, as you know, then I got into using the new standard tuning when I was 18. And you know, like just you know, like trying to get a feel for your history or your story here. I have to say, like, I'm even more impressed now with your reviews, like, you know, like with your current work, than now that I know what your background is. I have to say it's pretty amazing, because like you really do know what you're writing about, right? You do know what you're writing about.
Thank you for that. My usual line, though, is like, I've had a lot of very, very serendipitous, right place, right time moments in my life. You know what I mean? So so a lot of things kind of just, if I look back, there were points in time where certain things happened, and I can go right back and say that's where this started. And so I've had my fair share of those. So I consider myself a very, very lucky guy.
And, you know, I guess like in parallel, you know, to being a musician, a working musician, you were always a music lover and music listener.
Yeah. And my taste always went far beyond the stuff I play. I mean, that was the thing. I have been an unfillable sponge for music, of most persuasions. I mean, and in fact, the interesting thing is, you know, going into the classical world, you know, my tastes in classical world are typically smaller ensemble things. I mean, I love music from across, you know, the centuries, with a particular penchant for Baroque era stuff, but I tended towards small ensemble, and I tended away from vocal stuff. And the funny thing is, my wife, Rio, about 10 years ago, and when we got together, which is 30 years ago, she didn't buy a single. She used to love, like, she was a big Dylan, like singer-songwriter, Dylan, Leonard Cohen, you know, all that kind of stuff. But she never bought records. I mean, I was always the one who bought her the new Dylan record, you know, or the new Leonard Cohen record. But it's only about 10 years ago, I was on the road traveling as a writer in Europe. And I started noticing that she was buying like stuff at Amazon, like music, and not just a little bit, but a lot. And it was all Baroque era countertenor stuff. And after seeing this happen for some period of time, I just sent her an email and I said, now you get it. And she sent me an email back and said, yes, I do. And the cool thing is that she has introduced me to that stuff. I mean, the only thing that we don't see eye to eye on is opera, not because I don't like some of the music in the operas, but I don't like I don't like huge. I don't like really big. Yeah. And the recitatives I can do without, you know. If I hear a recital of music from an opera and it's all the arias, I'm great, but I'm not a big recitative fan. So that's where we haven't crossed, but she's introduced me. So it's been really great because she keeps telling me, you know, over the years how much I've introduced her to music that she never would have heard. And now I can say the same thing in return because I'm now getting to really know this stuff. So my tastes were always big. You know, I mean, the big problem is like, you know, I mean, I'm now 65, and the big thing that is troubling me is so much music. And, you know, I'm hoping to be around for a good many more years, but, you know, I'm definitely in the third act of my life. And it's like so much music, so little time, because, you know, I got into like suddenly about 3 years ago, I started getting into like diving really deeply into country music, like not the pop country stuff, but the real deal. Yeah. And I started buying all these Bear Family Records box sets, that great German company who put out amazing reissues of like everything from, you know, like complete Merle Haggard collections, you know, to like right back to like the country music, the Big Bang in 1927, when I think it was RCA went to Bristol, and just they brought a recorder and they just recorded a pile of people, and some of the people they found were like the Carter family, Hank Williams, you know, like names that have become iconic in the country field. So I've become really interested in that. And the problem with me is like, my wife is the same. If we like something, we never do it halfway. We always go a long way. So, I mean, there's just so much music, and I keep finding more that I haven't heard, and it makes me crazy because I just think, you know, I'll never get to hear it all, you know, and I wish I could.
Yeah, you know, there seems to be like a little bit of a potential conflict for you here, because you said like you really don't believe in just listening to music once, right? So you want to really get to know it. You want to kind of like feel it rather than just hear it, right? Yeah. And being interested in listening to a lot of music. So that means you have a pretty potentially stressful life.
Actually, no,
I know
you're joking, but no, yeah. It's great. But no, but the truth is though, but it is a challenge because, you know, if I'm reviewing one of these massive King Crimson box sets, you know, I mean, I don't listen to it once. I mean, the only box set of King Crimson that I have not listened to 8 to 10 times is the Heaven and Earth box, and that's only because they got every bloody project gig that they ever did. And I mean, like, it's I don't know how many hours. But it's humongous, like 60 or 70 hours. And I got the box only about 2 weeks before Street. But normally I listen to these box sets that long. I'm going to be doing a Caravan box just after I hopefully finish the Crimson book. And it's like 35 CDs, you know, and I will listen to everything at least 5 times, you know. But the thing is that I carve my day out. See, what the thing is, I don't know about you, but most people I know can't do what I do, which is listen to music all the time. I go to sleep with in-ear buds because my wife can't go to sleep with noise, and I can't go to sleep in silence.
Mhm.
So I go to sleep listening to music. And I mean, I'm not listening to like ambient music or soft stuff. I can listen to like Peter Brotzman, you know,
Mhm.
when I'm
Mhm.
going to sleep. So I put music on and it actually runs all night long on a little DAB that I have beside the bed. So if I wake up in the middle of the night and I have to go to the bathroom, I get up, I go back to bed, and for 5 minutes I'm aware. And then the rest of the time it's playing. And I don't know, maybe there's something to this idea of subconscious, but during the day, I mean, I listen to music from the minute I get up
Mhm.
to them till after we start. Like when Rio and I get together for dinner, we alternate nights. One night it's my choice what to listen to, the next night it's hers. And then when we have dinner, that's when the music stops. So I've been listening to music for probably close to 12 hours already, not including overnight.
Mhm.
So when I'm reviewing stuff, I carve out a certain amount of time in the day where that's what I listen to. And then I have a part of the day, which is what I call my discretionary listening time, where I can listen to anything I want. So I've organized it. I don't know. It just seems to work naturally, you know?
I think there's a lot to be said about the fact of subconsciously um, digesting and even like as you say, like listening. I think that this idea of active listening, even though I do think I understand what people mean by that, right? But I think the passive listening is much more important. And in fact, like you know mentioning King Crimson, I remember that I really had to listen to those albums in the background, like I was 18 or something, right? And I had to play them in the background to appreciate them. I had to listen to them 10 times
Yeah.
to understand what was going on. And so I still believe that that it's a very valid mode of listening,
Yeah.
to listen while you do other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, you know,
Absolutely. I'm completely, because your brain, I mean, you know, like your brain is catching it. I mean, it's if your ears are hearing it, your brain is catching it and it's processing it in some way. I'm
yes,
not
exactly.
exactly sure how, but it
Yeah,
is.
yes,
I'm guarantee you. You know?
yeah. So like what goes through my head as a musician or as a musician who's published, right, is that well, there's nobody else like you, but I
Oh,
was going to say people like you listening to my music, and it's kind of like but I'm serious. It's kind of like an honor. Like whenever I meet somebody who I know who has a huge record collection and who knows a lot about music and sort of like has like a really wide taste and big ears, as you were saying. And then if I then get good feedback from people like that, I feel really good.
well, yeah. Listen, you know, for me, it's the other. I mean, of course, it's the other way around. I mean, to me, you know, the privilege of being able to hear the amount of music I get to hear, you know, I mean, Leonardo, I mean, I could live my life on what Leonardo sends me and just
Mhm.
that, you know, I mean, but, you know, I mean, like to be able to, and then to be able to meet and engage with the people who are making the music like yourself. I mean, that's the privilege. And, you know, so when I started traveling, and that was my big, like that was what really kickstarted my writing, was like in 2006, I had I remember I said I have distinct moments. My
Mhm.
right place, right time was at the Ottawa Jazz Festival in June 2006, when Nils Petter Molvær, the trumpet player from Norway, I'm sure you know him, played there with the band that he had had for quite some time at that point, which was Eyvind Arset on guitar, who's, you know, and is monster. Jan Bang doing live sampling, Runa Arneson on drums, and DJ Strange Fruit doing turntables,
Mhm.
Paul Niehaus. And I went out to dinner with them after, because
Mhm.
I had met Nils Petter at the sound check. And I was sitting beside Jan Bang, and Jan said, you know, it's the second year of this festival I run called Punkt. It's a live remix festival. And he said, like, you know, would you be interested in coming to cover it? And I mean, it's like, okay, Norway, live remix festival. Yeah, I'll do it, you know. So 8 weeks go by and I hear nothing. And then suddenly I get an email from him, and it's like, I think 2 or 3 weeks before the festival, and just says, so are you coming? And, I'd never been out of the country in years. So I had my passport had lapsed. I didn't have a suitcase. I'm nothing. And I just said yes. And that was my first of what would become many trips to Norway, which was like at the end of August 2006. And at that time, I was trying to write daily reports. So like this was a 3-day festival. There would be stuff during the day, but like night, it was the real thing. There'd usually be 4 shows where you go see a band, and it could be anything from pop music to improvised music to classical music in one room, and they do like an hour-long performance. And then you go to their alpha room next door, where you'd see a live remix of that show with other musicians engaging with the remixers. And I was literally freaked out. I got the first night, I think I got 3 hours sleep because I had to write my report. The second night, I didn't get any sleep because they were doing a boat trip during the day on the third day, which they do for guests of the festival, taking us out to an island and feeding us fish soup and wine and stuff. And so I had to get my report done, and then it was time to go. So by the time I got home, and the other thing is I also didn't realize, like, I really need to arrive the night before the festival starts and get a good night's sleep before I start. I arrived the day of the festival. I left the day it ended. So I got home on what would be Sunday night here at midnight. I'd been awake for 46 hours. And I was so absolutely pumped. I couldn't sit still. I was so excited at what I'd seen. Aside from the fact that it was just, the concept was great. It was like, the musicians there, it was Nils Petter, Avid, Jan Bang, Arve Henriksen. It was all the great guys that I'd been listening to. Boogie Veseltop, all these guys were there. And I was seeing them, I was meeting them. It was like, just my mind was just blowing every minute. And I got home and I couldn't contain myself. I woke my wife up, and that's a really bad thing to do. Rio and I love Rio. Like, we've been together 30 years, but I know that waking Rio up is never a good thing. But I couldn't help myself. I was just too excited. And that started an 8-year run of going to Punkt and covering them every year. And they started saying they didn't have to provide reports to their sponsors because what I wrote about it covered everything they needed to say. They even had me speak to like a couple of dinners of sponsors, like about why Punkt was important and why, because Punkt, I don't know how much you know about the festival. I'm sure you know some about it, but they started taking it on the road. The concept, I saw Punkt in Estonia, where some of the Norwegian guys, the 2 guys who co-artistic direct the thing, Jan Bang and Eric Honoré, were there, and they brought Avid our set, and they brought Sitzel Endresen, the singer, my heart, but then they engaged with other musicians. And then another time I saw them at Enjoy Jazz in Germany, in Mannheim, and they engaged. They had John Hassel there, but they also had Ensemble Modern, like when they traveled, they always ensured that they were meeting up with musicians from the area there and collaborating with them as well. So Punkt was becoming kind of like an international collection of like-minded musicians and other people like me, who just, were sort of advocating for it because I believed in what they were doing. Unfortunately, that stopped when the chronic fatigue thing hit, but that led to other travels in Norway, though. Then suddenly I started getting invited to other festivals. And the next thing you know, I'm in Trondheim, I'm in Molde, I curated a series of Norway. They asked me to curate a series of some of the musicians from Norway I thought were important at the time at Kongsberg in 2012. And I even made it to Svalbard above the Arctic Circle, where they have the International Seed Bank, and they have have a festival in mid-February, a jazz festival, and the sun isn't coming up yet over the horizon. It's like, you know, all dark except for about a few hours a day where it's sort of pinky. Anyway, Norway was a huge experience, and it expanded my ears, it expanded my network, and it led to being invited to, you know, events in many other places in Europe and even farther afield, South Africa, Malaysia. And they were probably like, I mean, if I think about the most exciting time of my life, 2006 to 2014 was definitely like, because I was traveling 8 to 10 weeks a year, going places I'd never, ever have the chance to see otherwise, seeing musicians, meeting the musicians, and writing about the music. I mean, it doesn't really get much better than that. You know, but then mid 2014 is when I started feeling something was wrong. And that's what kind of led to this chronic fatigue thing. And it has changed my life. I mean, you know, because I cannot travel the way I used to. I don't have the energy to like fly overnight transatlantically, get one night's sleep, and then work, you know, because as much fun as this all sounds, and it is work, of course. So, you know, that's when everything sort of stopped. But those 8 years, they were really good. And I'm not bitter that I don't have them anymore. I feel fortunate to have had the experiences and, you know, maintained the friendships with so many people that I've met over the years there. So, you know, I consider myself a lucky guy.
Yeah, I just had a bad pun in my head. Like it was the culmination of your life, right?
Yes, well, you know, Leonardo calls me Kelmanator, so we can do a lot with that one.
Yeah. So I guess you're still very friendly with everybody that you met in Norway, and it was basically just your health that kind of like stopped you from living that life, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, I'm not as close to them as I was, of course, but I mean, you know, Jan and Eric were invited to bring Punkt to the Montreal Jazz Festival a few years back. So, you know, we had a very nice hang and, you know, and everything. It was unfortunately not, they didn't really, the festival didn't really set it up the way it should have been. So it was not as exciting an experience as I was hoping people in Montreal would have like the first time I did, you know, but it was still very good. And it was really good to see these guys. Avid was there as well. And, you know, I mean, I do keep in touch with a lot of people there that, you know, I you know, not weekly, but, you know, a few times a year, we communicate, and it's great. I mean, it's now a part of my life, but, you know, same says, you know, I mean, Germany, you know, Rainer Kern, the guy who runs Enjoy Jazz, I mean, you know, he will bring me there and give me 4 nights hotel before the festival if I want to come. And it's a festival I can do because they only do 1 show a night. So that's manageable for me with this chronic fatigue. So I'm kind of hoping once things settle down and we're all vaccinated and we can start moving around again, that at least, you know, I'll get myself back to Heidelberg. That festival takes place sort of in Heidelberg, Mannheim, Ludwigshafen region. You know it. And so I'm hoping I can get back and to at least to do that.
Hey, would you like to share a little more about the chronic fatigue, because it's sort of like a mystery? And so you said like it started for you that you were not feeling well. So what happened?
I was just more tired than I started feeling. Well, this is also the curious thing. My wife has it. She got it in 2005. And usually it starts with an incident of some kind. And with Rio, it was a really bad stomach bug. And from that point on, she had she went through no energy. And, you know, the good news is, you know, she got a very good doctor who put her through like, you know, the $1 million workout, you know, workup of tests and stuff. and they couldn't find anything. And, you know, I mean, it's not contagious per se, but it's also not completely unheard of that people who live together, sometimes it happens, passes from one to the other. But, you know, I mean, it was 9 years after she got it. But I just started noticing that, you know, after I did, like, you know, I would come back from these trips and I'd be a little tired. Who wouldn't be, you know? But I started noticing I was more tired than I normally was, and that it started getting worse progressively and a little bit quickly, you know? So finally, I mean, that was the year I had to cancel going to Punkt, which was like the biggest, I mean, you know, I'm sick when I don't go to Punkt was kind of the way it was then. And I was, you know, so I went through this whole thing of, you know, many doctors, you know, blood tests. I mean, you know, gastrointestinal tests, you know, brain scans, pituitary, thyroid, all the stuff, you know. And they really are not sure what it is, unfortunately, but at least it's starting to become a little more accepted as an actual condition. And because, trust me, you know, I mean, I sound and look pretty energetic right now, but I can guarantee you when this is over, I'm going to be flat for a while, you know, not for weeks or anything, but for, like, you know, for a day, I'll probably need to kind of rest up. And but I wouldn't have had it any other way. But, you know, it's a crippling condition because, you know, it's like, you know, people say, well, why don't you, people say, well, why don't you just, you know, you exercise a bit or you this or that, you know, and it's like, and the thing I keep trying to say is, okay, listen, you know, try driving your car with an empty tank of gas, you know, it's kind of like that. But the other thing is, you know, it's not like you can bank up sleep, you can bank up hours of rest and then have the energy. What I've learned, and I mean, a lot of it's thanks to my wife, but also from my own experience now, having been living with this for 6 years, is that it really is about managing your energy. So, you know, as you know, when people want to do things with me, I give them a fairly restricted window. You know, I kind of my usable hours where I feel I'm at my best are kind of between noon and 6. And so, you know, I can do stuff during that time. But, you know, and I mean, yeah, I can go to shows and, you know, I'll write about them the next day or something. But I mean, but going to a show is a physical thing. The thing about chronic fatigue is that everything is tiring. I mean, making the bed is tiring. Taking a shower is tiring. Getting dressed is tiring. You know, we have 2 cats, and, you know, I do, because I'm a little better in the mornings than Rio. We have this thing where I do 4 days of getting up in the morning to feed the cats because they will not allow us to not do that. And then she does 1. And so we sort of do that. And we figured out routine where, you know, we maximize each of our best times to do the things that need to be done. Just the mundane stuff of life, you know. I mean, that's the part that but, you know, it's interesting. It's, you know, I'm again, this getting older thing, I'm starting to think maybe there's something to this idea of getting a little wiser. I don't know, but it seems like, you know, I'm starting to, maybe because it's been so difficult to do some of these things at times, I'm starting to appreciate the value and the pleasure of really small things in life, like getting up and playing with my cats and feeding them and, you know, cleaning their bowls and stuff like that. These are things that I used to just consider like jobs that had to be done. Now they're actually things that I have to make sure I've got the juice for, and I enjoy them. It's a funny thing, and I've learned to appreciate smaller things in a much bigger way since I've gotten this condition. Now, the good news is that if there is any good news about COVID, is that there is some suggestion that the long haulers, what they are suffering, is in some way related to chronic fatigue. And what that means, because the biggest problem with chronic fatigue is nobody's wanted to spend the money to really seriously investigate it. But people will want to spend money to investigate the long haulers and see if there's a way to deal with that. So the hope is that if they figure out a way to deal with the long hauler people who have had COVID, that might be something that can be transferable to treat for chronic fatigue. So, you know, I remain in hope, always in hope. And in the meantime, I try to manage my life in ways that allow me to do what I need to do. And that's why, you know, doing this book last year, you know, I've largely had to say no to doing reviews for All About Jazz, because I know I just can't do both. You know, before I could have done both, no problem, but not anymore.
So is there any medication that you're on for this?
Well, yeah, because the thing about chronic fatigue is, I mean, not only is there the fatigue, but there are these side, I would say no, there are side effects that happen. So, for example, I was always a pretty heavy migraine sufferer from my teens. I suffered migraines fairly regularly. Now I suffer them far more often and far more severely than they used to be. So I'm on medication that helps mitigate that, as an example. You know, Rio has issues with nausea, you know. So, I mean, I'm using medicinal marijuana CBD because that's a natural anti-inflammatory, and that helps with the headaches. Rio is using the THC because that helps with nausea. So, you know, like there are different people respond or react differently with chronic fatigue as well. And the peripheral, I guess that's a better word, the peripheral things that they suffer that are amplified by chronic fatigue, you know, that's what you have to really try and treat. Because I mean, if I can be without a headache, you know, and all I've got to worry about is having a certain amount of energy to be able to do a certain amount every day. If I'm careful and I don't overdo it, I can do okay. Now, that said, you know, if I do what I usually do and cover like the Ottawa Jazz Festival back to back with the Montreal Jazz Festival, I can do it. But when it's over, I'm usually flattened for like about 2 weeks. And when I got my first COVID shot, it put me out for about 2 weeks. Just, you know, I could barely get out of bed most days, you know. But I feel fortunate that I can manage it and still manage to write, you know, because that was my big fear. What, you know, I'm gonna suddenly be unable to do that. But thankfully, I've been able to, you know, manage. And Rio too. You know, I mean, we've managed to kind of carve our life out in a way that, you know, we can both do the things that matter to us most, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking that like once you kind of like start or having the realization that you're suffering from a handicap like that, then there's the whole emotional aspect of also having to deal with the new situation and of, say, having less time, having less energy, having less time, and all of that. And I hate saying this because but I was lucky because I had somebody who'd already been through it. So, you know, I got a lot of guidance from her, and also, you know, she went through the emotional thing in a big way because, you know, neither of us knew what was going on, you know. You know, I mean, I was fine and she was not, and that was
hard for me to watch what was happening to Rio. And, you know, I was in some ways fortunate that when it happened to me, you know, I already saw like how it could be. And so and I'll be honest, one of the things I've tried to be, and I'm more as I get older, is I've tried to be a more positive person in life. When I was younger, I was a big worrier, you know. I was constantly concerned with what was coming and not with what was here. And one of the things I learned from my traveling was to really appreciate the moments in the present, because, you know, a lot of, you know, we all say, okay, fine, you know, we can't see a band, we can get a live recording, and a live recording is great, you know, but it doesn't take the place of a live performance, which is the thing that happens in a moment. It's there, and when it's over, it's gone, you know. And to me, so having that kind of helped me become a little more positive about things. And so I didn't go through a huge, you know, woe is me, I can't do what I used to do anymore as a writer. The only drag was that I stopped being managing editor in 2013 because I was spending too much time editing other people's stuff, and I wanted to do more writing. And within a year, my writing was curtailed by this. But, you know, listen, I'm nearly finished the book. When I finished, I'll go back to doing reviews for All About Jazz, and hopefully, if the book does well enough, there's a second book that we have in mind. You know, I now know that I can do it, which is good. And I've got a guy, you know, as a publisher who understands my situation, so has been beyond understanding as far as like, there's no deadline. It's like, it'll come when it comes. You know, Declan probably, or I don't know if you've met Declan.
I've met him, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, he's really good. So anyway, I'm really fortunate for that. But I've managed to avoid too much of the negative stuff, because it's very easy to fall into that, you know. It really is. But I have had too many good things happen in my life, and it may sound simplistic, but to me, I kind of look at that and I go, you know, I've been, you know, a very fortunate guy, more fortunate than many in terms of some of the experiences I've had. And so I've got to just take what comes and move with it, you know.
John, what is the concept of the King Crimson book?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, you know, for me, and the thought of a book all started in about 2014. In fact, when a guy within the space of 2 weeks, I got contacted by 2 different agents in the UK who wanted me to write, and I put this in quotes because that's their words, not mine, the definitive progressive rock history book. I had actually gotten to the point where I had chosen the agent and the publisher. It was Little Brown Associates, and we were putting forth the, you know, the chapter outlines and all that kind of stuff. And then I got sick. I had to bail. But I really, you know, I mean, after writing in the online world for so long now, I've really wanted to just get just one. I'd be happy with one book published. Now I might have 2, but I just wanted to get one thing that I could actually hold in my hands, you know. And so when I started looking at, you know, I mean, you know, I've got like at the moment 2,843 articles at All About Jazz. That's a lot of writing. And when I started collecting just my King Crimson writing, just the stuff about the band alone, forget solo projects from past members and present members, you know, I had a lot of stuff. So I approached Declan because I've been, you know, reviewing stuff, the Crimson boxes and everything else coming out. And I said, you know, what about the idea of like, you know, a collection of my writing about King Crimson from All About Jazz, but, you know, revised, updated, made consistent, hopefully, he says, improved, because, as I speak, so I write, which is run-on sentences and tangential thoughts. So, my writing, the way I look at my writing is, it's information dense, but it's got a lot of good information in it. And it if ever there's something that somebody wants to read to find out about something, I think I'm a pretty good guy to read. I don't talk much about my feelings about it because I don't think my opinion matters that much. I just think, my writing about what I perceive this music to be is more important, and then you can decide yourself. So anyway, all that said, I pitched the idea of just, my older writing has got I've made more revisions just because of, simplifying prose. Same information, just making it more digestible. But also, so that was what I pitched as the original idea. And, we kind of bantered it about for a while. Originally he wanted to make it much bigger, but then when I put together like how much writing I'd done, like we were talking about doing like, all the stuff I'd written about the British progressive / art rock stuff. So that would include my writing about the Canterbury scene, Hatfield in the North, and all that kind of stuff. It was just like, it'd be like, 1,000, 1,500 pages or something. So we pared it back to what I think is manageable, which is a book that contains revised and then hopefully, he says, improved articles about King Crimson. And this includes, CD reviews, box set reviews, live reviews, in some cases interviews, because I did some interviewing when I saw them live. Also solo projects from members past and present. So anything I wrote about Bill Bruford is fair game, as is Jack Chick. And then 1 degree of separation. So if Brian Eno played with Robert Fripp, anything I wrote about Brian Eno can also be included. So that's a reasonably cogent concept for a book. And it comes down to about 135 articles. Ranging in length from 500 to 600 words to 15,000. So
that's a lot.
It's a lot. And I also am planning to, I want to write some connective tissue where necessary. There won't be a lot of it, as it turns out, but a little bit. But also I want to have section intros because I've sort of structured the thing, big chunk on King Crimson and then like artists past and present. I want to have an intro for each section to kind of provide some biographical context for the artist. And so that will be new. And also I'm planning to write a couple of book exclusive articles. One is I've never covered, they put out the tour boxes every year since 2014. I haven't covered one of them. So I'm going to cover all of them in one article. And then the other thing I'm thinking is, and it depends when it comes out, it might extend to 3, but in the 1969 box, I talked about the session reels for In the Court of the Crimson King in considerable detail. So since they've released the session reels for In the Wake of Poseidon and Lizard, which is my all-time favorite King Crimson record, I'm going to write an article about those session reels, and depending upon the timing, maybe Islands, because I'm sure they'll be doing that this year. I just don't know when. If it's towards the end of the year, it'll be too late, because I'm hoping, I'm at the point now, I've got 10 articles left to revise. So I think I'll be done that in a couple of weeks. And then I'm going to do the new stuff. So I'm thinking I'll be done probably by early August at the pace I'm going. I'm having a good run right now. So if I can continue that run, I could be done by early August and hand in a first draft. And then, we'll see what they do with it. Because I'm sure there'll be things to do after that. But it's exciting, and I don't know if you know, but if this book does well enough, and I'm really got my fingers crossed, then the second book will collect my writings about ECM.
Mm-hmm.
And the carrot for that one as new material will be that I've got those 15 or 16 interviews that I did back in 2000, 2001 for that
Mm-hmm.
book I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And other than the one I did with Bill Frisell, which I published at All About Jazz in 2011, because it was like, Bill's a great guy. Have you ever met him?
No, never met him.
He is almost too nice to be on this earth. He's
Mm-hmm.
such a nice guy.
I can imagine, yeah.
He really is. I mean, like, I honestly, I mean, he sends me emails asking how I'm doing. It's just like, he's really nice. And it amazes me, but, because he's got lots of people like me around. But anyway, his interview, he did a great interview, which basically gave me a completely chronological account of every session he ever did for ECM. Mm-hmm. So I was doing an interview with him for a new one. So I thought, I'll take that and we'll do 2 interviews back to back, one which is now and one which is, the ECM years. So other than that, though, I mean, I've got interviews with Norma Winston, John Taylor, Kenny Wheeler, Errol Vanderson, Eberhard Faber, Peter Erskine, not Paul Motion, that never happened. But I've got about 15 or 14 interviews to do. So it's great. So that will be hopefully a second thing to do. And in my life, I never thought I'd be publishing a book, let alone 2 possible.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought I'd have articles at All About Jazz that have been read like 150,000 times. I mean, that's just boggles the mind.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of at least for me, a little bit of a lesson in what you're saying is that as long as you keep going, you're gonna get full circle somehow. You're gonna get to that point where, like, these individual articles, which when you started, like they were never meant to be part of a larger whole, right? And
yep.
then suddenly, like everything comes together, and it's like gravity pulling everything together somehow. And then even after that, just having the vision or the idea to actually complete that project that was there at the beginning of your career as a writer.
Yep.
I think that's just wonderful.
It is kind of funny, because I told Tina Pelican, mm-hmm. She's retired last year from ECM, but it was right around that time that I got the go ahead in the book from Declan, and I told her, and she was really thrilled because I mean, this is how we met. It was like talking about this book 20 years ago. But mm-hmm. The other thing is that when I look at the writing I've done for All About Jazz, 2,843 articles, that's a lot of my life has mm-hmm. been given to writing for this site. And the thing that's kind of interesting is that if the ECM book did well, I mean, we have talked very generally about even a possible third, because I can see when I look at my writing a number of themed books that could be culled from all the stuff I've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, that's been both a wonderful surprise and a great thing just to discover that there are threads, even though I never really intended them to be there. There are common threads that run through all this stuff.
Yes. Are you an avid reader yourself? I mean, do you read books usually?
Yes, I do indeed.
Yeah.
Generally, when I'm reading Anthony's book right now because I want to write it up. But mm-hmm. Generally, when I'm doing a lot of writing, I need to read something that's just less brain. So,
mm-hmm. Stephen King.
So, no, well, yes, but actually, I'm doing. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but there's an American writer named F. Paul Wilson, and he's written this sort of thing he calls The Secret History of the World. It started with a 6-book series called The Adversary Cycle, and then this was back in the 80s and early 90s, and has expanded from there to be like his life's work. Mm-hmm. There's a series of books with a character named Repairman Jack, because he fixes things. Anyway, but Anyway, what he fixes isn't what you think, but it's the thing that I like is that I was a big Lovecraft fan when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And this F.L. Wilson's Secret History of the World is very Lovecraftian in its concept. There is not good and evil. There isn't God and the devil. There are simply, there is a power of something in the cosmos that is looking to absorb and turn into horrific places. And then there is a counter one, which isn't exactly good. It just doesn't want the other thing to win. So it's kind of heady, but it's really fun stuff. So what I've done is, like, I mean, there were times when I would read the entire series, but it's become so big now that I think I couldn't reread the entire series now. It's just, you know, I don't know if I'd live long enough, but so I'm taking a certain segment, which is sort of the sort of last part of it. And I'm going through that right now. And you know, when I'm done, my friend Carlo in Cleveland has written a couple of books. One about, it's interesting, he writes about music, but he also writes about many other things. And he's published 2 books in the last couple of years. One is about a lawyer there who's got quite a history. And another one is about an architect. And so I've got his books there, and those are on my list as well, but I got to do those when I'm not writing my own book. But yeah, no, I think reading is, I have a cousin, and her son, when he was a young guy, really loved coming over to our place because we had all this music and, you know, books and movies and all this kind of stuff. I'm also a film freak. And, you know, he wanted to be a writer, but he hated reading. And I kept saying, you can't be a writer if you don't know, like, you have to read to understand how to write. I mean, you know, it's the osmosis of, like, you know, how sentences work and stuff. And then you can tell people who don't read right, you know, because I mean, they can't make a sentence to save their life. So I think reading is important, you know, and even still as a writer, I think it's important to keep reading, whether it's sort of fluffy stuff like F. Paul Wilson or more heady intellectual stuff. I think just the idea of, like, you know, constantly reading words is a good thing, especially for a writer.
It's what you just said is so fascinating, because I know quite a few musicians who don't listen to music.
I hear that sometimes, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I think, well,
I know that they say I don't want to listen to other stuff because it will color my art. And I can see that, but at the same time, we are fundamentally like the sum total of our experiences. And, you know, there are some musicians who created wonderful things in a vacuum, but there are not that many of them, I don't think. What do you think? I don't think that there aren't that many who have.
No, I wouldn't even know who that would be. I think there's always the fascination actually comes from hearing something that fascinates you. I don't think you have the imagination without getting some input, really.
Yeah.
And then based on something that kind of like excites you, then you can create something new that excites you.
Yeah.
But without that, I think it's not possible. But then with music, I think it's a little bit, and this may apply to writing. I think what our senses do that are not our feelings, right? That's the input. That's kind of like where things come in, and then it's the emotional world that is being created by actually listening to whatever your favorite band was when you were 10 years old. I don't remember the name, but the feeling. That is what kind of like propels you forward. That's what made you play guitar. That's what, you know, and everything. And And it's that core. And what I think about like these friends of mine, musicians who don't really listen much to music, they make music all day anyway, and they play. And so it's more about, it's not so much like looking back. In a way, listening to music, recorded music, is a little bit like being in a retrospective mode, where if you were in a position to actually be able to play every day, you don't really need to listen to music. I mean, it's different. It's different for me. It's different for me.
Yeah,
I have to say.
I'd still have to listen to other stuff, because I mean, you know, I am not on the same level as guys like you as a musician. Like, I mean, you know, I do not kid myself that as a player, I was a good player, but you know, but I mean, I don't have the same kind of creative spark, I don't think, that you know, a guy like you has. But at the same time, you know, I do see, when I listen to the stuff I've done, I do see that there is a voice there, and I can definitely say that it's a sum total of many different things that all get filtered, you know, through my, whatever my view and perspective is, into something that is different. And that's, you know, I mean, when I joined that band Larkspur, the guy who wrote a lot of the original material at the time, sadly passed, he was one of these guys who didn't want to listen to other people's music, you know, except when we were learning other people's stuff. But anyway, so it seemed kind of odd. But anyway, and I just don't get it. Even if you play all the time, you know, I just don't. I mean, I'm not saying it's invalid. I'm not saying it's not a legitimate frame of mind. I'm just saying I do not get it. I because I think my world would be infinitely less rich. Without it. Yeah. I mean, even if I'm not using it as a source for my own work, you know, if I'm playing, I mean, you know, listen, I mean, I was listening to mostly jazz when I was playing in that rootsy band in the 90s. So, I mean, what I was listening to and what I was playing were two very different things. But I think that was important, actually, that I was listening to something that was completely different from what I was playing, because it was like a, I don't know, it was like a breather from where I was and put me somewhere else. So I don't know, I'm not sure if that makes much sense, but that's kind of how it seems to me. So I wouldn't object if somebody said something like that to me anymore, but I wouldn't be able to live my life that way. You know?
You know, I think there are actually people, and you're one of them, I'm one of them, who are like globally, let's say, you're universally interested in music or in love with music. And
not a style, even not a style. You're just,
no, it's not a style. Music. No, just with music.
You just love music.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's really just like the perfect foundation to even like to always be in the position where you can enjoy music also, right? Because you're not dependent on like finding that tune that sparks joy, right? So it's
yeah. But you know, but it's people also, like, you know, well, I mean, do you have to listen to music differently when you're writing, you know? And it's like, okay, you know, when I was doing the 1969 box, you know, and doing the session reels, I mean, yeah, I would go and listen to like one take of Epitaph, and then go to another take of Epitaph and listen to a certain segment to see what Ian MacDonald was doing, you know? So was I listening to music very specifically with writing in mind? To some extent, yes, but largely no, I do not. I mean, when I'm listening to music, I'm just listening, and, you know, when it comes time to writing, I mean, the other thing is when I write, like, I very rarely have any idea what I'm going to say. I mean, truly, just I think of it very much like playing like improvisation. You know, I mean, I might have a first sentence, maybe. You know, but I mean, there was a time when I was first writing a lot, and I had a dog, and you know, the day that I was going to write what I was going to write about, I would take my dog, we'd go for a walk, and I'd be listening to the music in headphones. And by the time I got home, I knew the first sentence, and that was all I needed. But even now, I don't do that. I just start writing, and I write until I'm done. So, I mean, the good thing about All About Jazz is it hasn't stifled me in terms of being able to write at length. And sometimes I write too long, I'm sure people think, and that's fair enough. But for me, I honestly write till I'm done. And when I'm done, then I go back and I tweak it and I trim it where it looks flabby. I try and make it lean and all that kind of stuff. And it still might be too long for some people. But for me, it's the right length. You know, I mean, when you solo, you don't, you know, it's however long it needs to be. It's as long as it needs to be, and it's as short as it needs to be. You know. So
you're all about the process then. Like that's kind of like how I experience that attitude, let's say. And where there's no such not necessarily such a thing where you need to fit in a predefined form that somebody else puts in front of you, right? So where you create the form, right? And that's really what for me around 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, that was kind of like my realization as a musician, that I had the skill to not only improvise, but as I was improvising, I was creating the form.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. I mean, that's you know, I know that there are people who like to just freely improvise. I mean, you know, Enrico Rava, a great Italian trumpeter, I met in Mannheim in 2009, and he was doing a public interview, and he said a great thing. He said, you know, the free jazz movement of the 60s really wasn't free because there were all these rules: no melody, no changes, no rhythm, no this, no that. So, I mean, you know, he said, now I'm free because I can play whatever I want. If I want to be completely abstract, I can be that. If I want to blow a really melancholy melody, I can do that. That's freedom. And, you know, I think that applies. That's a big statement, because so many people feel the need to put a rule or a structure on something, when the truth is, once you get to a certain point, what you do leads to a structure or a form. I mean, it's an intrinsic, intuitive thing that when you're improvising, which is drawing music from the ether, you are somehow also at the same time shaping. You know, it's like sculpting or something.
Yes. And, you know, I find that is truly the beauty of jazz, or the blessing of modern jazz or contemporary jazz, let's say, that this has been accepted as something that you can call jazz. Like, you know, you don't have to have a certain, well, I don't even want to say
it doesn't have to swing. It doesn't have to.
Yeah. But whereas in contemporary classical music, for example, it's just still a huge issue. Like I'm on a group for contemporary classical music because I love contemporary classical music, but there are so many people there. Like when, you know, somebody posts a video of a really amazing composition that just doesn't have the idiom of what somebody else, you know, considers to be contemporary classical. They say this is not contemporary classical music, and this is what I kind of like think is really the great thing about and there's only the word jazz for it, unfortunately, right? In a way.
Yeah, I mean, and even it's not good enough. It's not a good enough word.
Yeah,
you
I
know.
know. But
But
at
it
least
is the right one for now.
yes, and at least what counts to me is that that freedom exists,
Yep.
right? And no matter how we call it, but it exists. And
Like, you know, but a lot of people don't realize, like, the people who define, who people who pigeonhole music the most are not the musicians.
mhm.
Most of the time, not even the writers. And I say this with no disrespect, but it's the fans, because they have, often some of them anyway, have a predefined idea of what it should be. And if it doesn't fit that, then it isn't what it is. And I see that. There was a festival I used to cover in Victoriaville in Quebec called the Festival International Musique Actuelle, FEMA. And what is Musique Actuelle? It's what the artistic director, Michel Levasseur, felt it was going to be that year, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they had, I mean, it was all pretty left of center stuff. You know, John Zorn was a regular, Anthony Braxton, you know. But, you know, I remember one time Fred Frith was there with Casa Brava, this great band. It had been his first rock band in a while, and it was with Carla Kilstead on violin, who I just adore her playing. Yeah. And it was a great band, and it was their first show. And I walked out of the show, and all the this time I was journalist. The writers who were regulars there, I was not really a regular, but these guys have been going for 20 years. They walked, and the first thing that their comment was it was, and I have trouble saying the words together. They said it was too melodic. And I realized at that moment that this festival may not be for me, because, you know, I mean, like, those are two words that can't exist in a sentence, you know. Too melodic. What's, you know, it still makes me feel this. I still think my head just sort of explodes when I hear it. But, you know, for them, if it wasn't weird, angular, jagged, aggressive, whatever, then it wasn't what they were looking for. And listen, if that's what they're looking for, that's fine, you know. But you know, like, then they're going to say that, you know, like, Pat Metheny is a drag because he's just really boring old melodic shit, you know. And it's like, come on, you know, guys.
Yeah, it's horrible. And, you know, the word "too," like TOO in English, it's one of the worst words in, at least in music. If you get a review and, like, it's too fast, too blah blah blah, too blah. Oh, I really, I think it, you know, writers shouldn't be allowed to even use that word in their reviews.
Who defines how fast it should be but the musicians? You know, like, you may not like it because it's fast, but doesn't mean it's too fast. That just means you don't like it. I mean, this is where, you know, my quip to some writers when I was editing was, you know, we're not the arbiter of what's good or bad. We're just the arbiters of what we like. And, you know, and the truth of the matter is, as I said earlier, is, like, I don't think many people really give a hoot that much whether I like something or not anyway, because I'm just another, you know, set of ears. You know, I think that I like to hope, I know that there are some people who like to see writers who shred musicians, you know, who you know, have some bon mots to use that are clever and everything. But, you know, the good writers, at least the guys I think are good writers, you know, their purpose is to create, in however many words they're allowed, the context of the music so that people can understand what it is as best as possible when you're using words to describe something that is not describable, and just know whether it's something that they should check out, you know. I mean, it's about the people who make it. It may be about how they made it, if that information's available. It's you know, it's about the context of the music, and try to describe a bit of what it kind of is like, so that we know if you're interested. But, you know, when people start applying judgments like that, that's an instant red flag for me, that's for sure. I think you're right. The word TOO should be cut out, as should be the word should. The word should is a word, I think, that, you know.
Yeah. Let's stop there. You know, like the worst that I've been called in a review was a one-trick pony.
You?
Yeah.
I'd love to know what the trick is. No,
Yeah.
no, that's that. Yeah, and my response to that is, and I hope you feel this way when people. I hope you are not adversely affected when you get a reviewer who writes something like that, because some people really feel it. Like some musicians really, I know some, and some that we both know, really get affected by that, and I wish that they weren't, because it's just one guy's opinion. And the fact that he has a forum to put it out there is just happenstance. It's not,
I do take people seriously, and that may be a problem sometimes. So I do actually take that input and I try to see what's their perspective, like what do they mean? Is there anything that I may want to improve or or change or whatever? And there's a little bit of being hurt maybe occasionally, but then in the end, like maybe sleep on it a night or maybe two sometimes, and then it's over, and like I'm going to continue doing what I do.
And there's not but there is definitely there's room for constructive criticism in music writing. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I remember when I covered the Crimson Jazz Trio, Ian Wallace, and he put a jazz trio together, right? And the first album they sent to me, and I it was a nice record, but I just my biggest walk away from it was, nice arrangements, well played. I wish they took more risk, and I got an email back from Ian's wife, and she actually thanked me for that, because she said, that's a reasonable and constructive thing to say. I really liked the record, but it would just be great to hear that people take a little more risk in the music, because I'm sure they can, and I think that there's, I think that musicians can learn from the writers to some extent, but, when they are being, and thankfully it's not many of them, but when they're being willfully sort of antagonistic to the musician, what were they thinking? Well, you certainly don't know, because you didn't talk to them about it, did you? I mean, like, it just, these kinds of things. I don't think there's a place for that in music writing. I mean, you can criticize without it being as a constructive thing, and that's a reasonable thing. And, whether the musicians agree or take it to heart or anything like that, well, that's to be determined, but it doesn't matter. So when I write, in very rare instances, something that I have to criticize, I'm very cautious about the words I use, because I know that whether it succeeds or not by my definition, these people put a lot of time, effort, heart, soul into making this music, and to getting to the point where they can make this music in their lives. And for me to just like summarily dismiss it with some, quick kind of, like I say, bon mot, good words. I have no right to do that to them, I will name a guy who gets written about that drives me crazy in Crimson. It's Jacko. When they talk about his vocals, some people, like, he sounds like Greg Lake. He sounds like John Wetton. He sounds like Greg Lake and John Wetton. He sounds, and it's like, no, he doesn't. He sounds like Jacko. And, he's capable of singing those things, which is a good thing. But his voice doesn't sound anything like either of those guys, But people do that, they did it with Adrian Belew at the beginning of Discipline, he sounds like David Byrne.
Mm. Yeah, you know, it's this is an example of, and like, yeah, you know, like we're maybe coming full circle here with what we started the conversation
Yeah.
with, but this is where and this is what Robert Fripp says, like the reviewer is reviewing himself or herself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Occasionally, and
Yeah.
and it just means that some people just maybe they just don't have the ear, or they don't understand that somebody can use the same techniques and still have their own voice, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And also that, you know, I mean, you know, listen, if you don't like, there was a magazine in Canada years ago, Maclean's, that used to have a guy I loved as a film reviewer, and he left. And I was so heartbroken because, you know, the movies that we both saw and loved, you know, I clearly connected with what he wrote. And so when he wrote about something I didn't know, I was interested in checking it out because I trusted him. And, but then they started getting people, you know, listen, if you don't like horror movies, then you shouldn't be reviewing them, because you're going in with an inherent bias. And if you cannot go in with an ear open enough, and I'm using film to distance us from music, but it's the same thing, obviously, but I'm just trying to do it as a separate thing. If you cannot have an open enough mind to accept what you're looking at, if you immediately dismiss it because of some tropes that you seem to think are common, then you really shouldn't write about it, because, you know, you're walking in with an inherent bias, and that just isn't, you know, isn't right. When you play, you know, I mean, you know, and when you improvise, you know, I mean, you go in and the idea is to be clear of mind and let what happens happen, you know. I think that I'm rambling on a bit about this, but it's the one thing that bothers me. I mean, there's a lot of writers out there who I aspire to be as good as, and who I really love. And there are a few out there who just make me wish they'd stop, because, like, you know, other than being clever, they don't write anything of real value. And all they do is hurt the musicians who are spending their lives trying to do this music that to them and to probably many other people matters.
Yeah, you know, it may be like the big problem of our time is that people need to make a living, right? And you start writing about the things that you actually know very well and that you like, and that you say, like, you have a goodwill towards the people that make that art, right? And you start there, but then somebody asks you, hey, could you also write about country music, right? And you hate it, but you start writing about it because somebody pays you a few bucks. And I'm pretty sure that something like this is happening a lot, or at least used to happen a lot. And that's a real problem.
It is, because the thing is like, you know, yeah, you're right. That's probably happens, but and you know, but I still think it's if you're asked to write about something and you are being paid for it, well, that's great. But you know, the people who are asking you to write about it want a good article, and an article that is intrinsically biased is, I find, can't be good, because, you know, I mean, if the answer is there's nothing you can do to make me like what you're doing, you know, then I don't think you should be writing about me, you know. And even if you're being paid, okay, that's fine, but, you know, maybe you should learn a little bit about, if you're asked to write about country music, maybe you should learn a little bit about country music. Maybe you should find out, you know, what the Bakersfield sound is, and, you know, what the Nashville sound is, and why, you know, things were like they were and stuff. Maybe you should learn a little bit about it, and then you're in a position that you can write about it and get paid for it, you know, at the same time. Because I know guys, listen, like my friend I told you in Cleveland, I mean, he's a lifer. He writes about whatever people approach him to write about. He's doing something right now that is like completely foreign to him. It's not arts, but, foreign to him. And, he's doing the work. And, I know that what he writes will be good. I think there's also what you say is true, but I also think there is a certain laziness now with the web and the ability to just start a blog and say I'm a music writer. It's also caused a laziness. People can't believe that I take the time to put in the detailed track and personnel listings for a 35 CD box, but I do it because I feel that the readers are going to want to know what's in the box. And when I write the review, I can, they can reference that and understand who's playing where and stuff. I think these are important things. And, I would get writers. I keep saying this to the managing editor, and it sounds like I'm complaining about all the writers, and I'm not, because most of the writers were great. But there was the occasional guy, and it was like, I don't have time for this. I'm asking the guy to put in an HTML code to italicize an album title. And it's like, I don't have time for this. It's like, if you're don't want to write and make it as good as it can be. And, there are some guidelines that you have to follow, and you write for a site or for a magazine. If you're not prepared to do that, well, then you shouldn't be doing it. I mean, it's part and parcel. That's true. So I don't know, but I don't want to sound too negative, because, there are just so many great writers out there. I keep saying that, maybe even in the context of this podcast, that I think that sharing observations is not something negative. No. So it's absolutely okay what we just talked about. Just so you know, I think we went over 2 hours already. So I think we're good. We're good, and this was wonderful, and it gives me a whole different appreciation for what you're doing, and also for, well, even just your opinion about me, and that, I'm just thinking that would be something really interesting at some point, and privately, to talk about. You would make a great coach in music also. It would be great just to talk to you to get feedback, right? This maybe a career you can consider, at some point. the third career for the third act. But honestly, I'd love. I mean, anytime, man. I would. To me, I don't know how much I can offer guys like you, but but I would certainly love to just, to be a little bit a part of the process in a way. It would be a privilege for me to do so. I'd certainly love to explore that with you further.
Let's see what I can do there.
Well, the thing that's great is, we are far apart most of the time, but with Zoom we're just this close.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Thank you so much for letting me wax on for so long. Usually people aren't interested. I don't want to, I can babble, so I appreciate it.
No, John, it's absolutely fantastic, and this doing this, for me, right, from my perspective, it's something that I don't know what I'm doing, in the sense that there's no aim, there's no end to this process. It is process, and I learn a lot about myself, and I think it's absolutely, in this day and age, it's important that we kind of indulge in the human experience, or whatever you want to call it. And so thank you, and let's babble some more. I don't know, soon, right?
Anytime. I'm rarely not here, so I'm always around.
Okay, John. Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye. Bye for now. Yeah.